$50 for the lot of them," Marcus Whelan called out, his voice cutting through the morning auction din like a blade through canvas. The auctioneer's gavel froze mid-swing above the makeshift platform where 7 women stood chained at the ankles, their faces etched with exhaustion and defiance. Dust motes danced in the harsh Arizona sunlight as whispers rippled through the crowd of prospectors and ranchers gathered in Tombstone Central Square. The scent of leather and unwashed bodies mixed with the metallic tang of fear. "You heard wrong, mister," the auctioneer sneered, wiping sweat from his brow with a stained kerchief. "These ladies are prime stock, widows with proper breeding. Starting bids $200 per head." Marcus stepped forward, his boots crunching on the packed earth. His weathered hands rested easy at his sides, but his gray eyes held steel. "I heard fine. 50 for all 7, and I'll take them off your hands right now." The chains clinked as the youngest woman, barely past 20 with auburn hair escaping her torn bonnet, lifted her chin. Her green eyes met his with a mixture of hope and wariness. Behind her, 6 other women, ranging from a silver-haired matron to a Mexican mother clutching a faded photograph, watched Marcus with the careful attention of prey animals sensing a shift in the wind. "That's highway robbery," spat a voice from the crowd. Samuel Garrett emerged from behind a freight wagon, his silver pocket watch chain glinting in the sun. As territorial tax assessor, Garrett commanded respect in Tombstone. But Marcus had heard whispers about the man's business dealings. These women owed debts to the territory. Their husbands died owing taxes, mining claims, store credit, legal auction, proper documentation. Marcus pulled a leather pouch from his vest, coins jingling inside. $50. Cash money. More than most folks see in 6 months out here. The territorial code requires proper bidding procedures, Garrett insisted, producing a thick ledger bound in black leather. Each woman's debt must be settled individually, according to Statute 247 of the Arizona Territory Commercial Code. The crowd murmured approval. Several men nodded toward Garrett's official bearing and the impressive documentation he brandished. Marcus noticed the fresh ink on the ledger's pages, too fresh for documents supposedly filed weeks ago. The writing gleamed blue-black in the sunlight, while legitimate territorial papers he'd seen bore the faded brown ink of the government's standard supply. "Documentation looks mighty fresh for old debts," Marcus observed. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Are you questioning territorial authority, Whelan?" Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the crowd's edge. A small boy with dirt-streaked cheeks broke through the ring of onlookers, running toward the chained women. "Mama Elena! Mama Elena!" The Mexican woman's photograph fluttered to the ground as she strained against her chains. "Pablito! Mi hijo!" 2 of Garrett's men moved to intercept the child, but Marcus was faster. He scooped up the boy and stepped between him and the approaching men. "Easy there, partners. No need to rough up children." "That boy's a ward of the territory now," Garrett declared, consulting his ledger. "Mother's debts extend to offspring according to nothing." Marcus cut him off. He knelt beside the boy, whose dark eyes were wide with fear. "What's your name, son?" "Pablo Restrepo," the child whispered. "Those men came to our house. Said Mama owed money for Papa's mining claim. But Papa never had no claim. He was a blacksmith." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known Eduardo Restrepo, a skilled craftsman who'd never shown interest in mining speculation. The man had died 3 weeks ago when his horse threw him near Dragoon Springs, leaving behind a wife and child with a small but honest smithing business. Blacksmith, you said? Marcus stood slowly, his hand unconsciously brushing the colt at his hip. Garrett stepped forward, his voice taking on an official tone. The boys confused by grief. Eduardo Restrepo filed claim papers for the Silver Bell prospect last month. Here's his signature. He opened the ledger to a page marked with a red ribbon, revealing Eduardo's name scrawled in the same fresh blue ink. Marcus examined the signature without touching the book. Eduardo had been barely literate, signing his name with careful, childlike strokes. This signature flowed with educated confidence. Too smooth, too practiced. That's not Eduardo's hand. You calling me a liar? Garrett's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. The crowd pressed closer, sensing confrontation. Several men moved their hands closer to their weapons. Marcus felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd carried as a cavalry sergeant in the Apache campaigns, when choosing wrong meant good men died. I'm calling you mistaken, Marcus said carefully, and I'm still offering $50 for these ladies' freedom. The auburn-haired woman spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education. Sir, I'm Margaret Sullivan. These debts, they appeared overnight. My husband died of fever 2 weeks ago. We owned our land clear, had money in the Tombstone bank. Suddenly there were papers claiming debts we never incurred. Grief makes people forget things, Garrett said smoothly. Especially women's minds, so fragile after loss. Margaret's green eyes flashed. My mind's sharp enough to remember my husband never borrowed against our property, and sharp enough to wonder why your ledger ink's still wet. A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus saw doubt creeping into some faces, but others, particularly Garrett's associates, moved to surround the platform. He counted 6 men wearing deputy badges, though he knew for certain Tombstone only employed 4 lawmen. The law's the law, Garrett declared. Proper auction procedures will be followed. First lot, Mrs. Sullivan. Minimum bid $200. $250, called a voice from the crowd. Marcus turned to see a heavy-set man in expensive clothes step forward. Name's Cornelius Wade. I'll pay good money for an educated woman. Margaret's face went pale. The other women drew closer together, chains clanking. Little Pablo pressed against Marcus's leg, trembling. Marcus felt the moment crystallizing around him like winter ice. In his mind, he saw his late wife Sarah's face, the expression she'd worn when he'd told her about the Apache women and children they'd found chained in that slave traders' camp 5 years ago. The expression that said some things were worth fighting for, regardless of cost. 300, Marcus announced. Wade grinned. 400. 500. Marcus opened his leather pouch wider, revealing a substantial collection of gold coins and bills. His entire savings, the money he'd been planning to use for expanding his small ranch near Benson. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus's display of wealth. Where'd a small rancher come by that kind of money? Sold cattle to the army. Honest work, honest pay. Marcus met Garrett's gaze steadily. You questioning that too? Before Garrett could respond, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into the square. A rider on a lathered horse pulled up near the platform, dismounting with urgent haste. Marcus recognized Deputy Tom Morrison, one of Tombstone's legitimate lawmen. Samuel Garrett, Morrison called out, his voice carrying clearly across the square. You need to come with me. Judge Whitman wants to see those territorial assessment papers you filed yesterday. Garrett's composed expression flickered for just a moment. The judge can wait. Official business here. Judge says now. Morrison's hand rested casually on his gun butt. Something about ink analysis and forged signatures. The crowd began to shift nervously. Marcus saw several of Garrett's fake deputies exchanging glances, hands moving toward weapons. The situation balanced on a knife's edge, with innocent people, including a child, caught in the middle. "Tell the judge I'll be along shortly," Garrett said through gritted teeth. "After this auction concludes legally." Morrison shook his head. "Can't do that, Sam. Judge was real specific about timing." He looked around the square, his experienced eyes taking in the tense faces and ready weapons. "Maybe this auction should wait till the paperwork's sorted." "The paperwork's in perfect order," Garrett snapped. "Continue the bidding." Marcus stepped forward, still holding Pablo's hand. "Deputy Morrison, these ladies claim their debt papers are forged. Boy here says his father never held mining claims. Might be worth the judge's time to examine those documents." Morrison nodded slowly. "Might be at that." He looked at Margaret Sullivan. "Ma'am, would you be willing to swear testimony about your late husband's debts?" "Gladly," Margaret replied. "Our marriage certificate, property deed, and bank records are at home, all properly filed and witnessed." "In brown ink," Marcus added meaningfully. "Territory standard." Morrison caught the implication immediately, his eyes fixed on Garrett's ledger with its gleaming blue entries. "Sam, let's take a walk. Bring your book." Garrett's face had gone red. "I won't be ordered around by some small-time deputy. I have territorial authority here. And I have a judge's direct order." Morrison's voice hardened. "Your choice how we do this." The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Marcus could feel violence building in the air like pressure before a thunderstorm. Then Pablo spoke up, his young voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Senor Marcus, will you really help Mama Elena?" Marcus looked down at the boy's trusting face, then at the 7 chained women watching him with desperate hope. Behind them, he could see Garrett's men fingering their weapons, ready to turn this confrontation deadly. But he also saw something else. Townspeople who'd gathered to watch an auction were starting to look uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "I will, son," Marcus said quietly. "That's a promise." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a double eagle gold coin, holding it where the sunlight caught its gleam. "Deputy Morrison, I'll post this as bond for these ladies' safekeeping while the judge examines those papers. $20 should cover any legitimate territorial fees." Morrison nodded approvingly. "Sounds reasonable." "Those women are not leaving this platform," Garrett snarled. "I don't care what some country judge thinks about proper procedure." Several of his fake deputies moved closer, hands now openly on their guns. Marcus felt the familiar cold calm of impending violence settle over him, the same feeling from a dozen cavalry skirmishes where quick thinking meant the difference between life and death. "Sam," Morrison said quietly, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." Margaret Sullivan suddenly spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of education and breeding. "Mr. Garrett, you mentioned Statute 247 of the Territorial Code. That statute was repealed last year when the territory reorganized its commercial laws. Any lawyer would know that." The crowd stirred. Several men began to look skeptical of Garrett's claims. Marcus felt the momentum shifting and pressed the advantage. "Ma'am's right," he said. "I've had to deal with territorial paperwork for my cattle contracts. Current law requires debt validation through the county clerk's office, not emergency auctions." Garrett's face had gone from red to purple. "You people don't understand the complexities of territorial administration. These debts are legitimate. These auctions are necessary. And these women will be sold today." He gestured sharply to his men. "Proceed with the auction. Anyone who interferes will be arrested for obstruction of territorial business." Morrison stepped forward. "Sam, I'm going to ask you one more time to come with me, peaceful-like. And I'm telling you to go to hell." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Marcus saw Garrett's hand move toward his weapon, saw the fake deputies tense for action. In that crystalline moment of decision, he made his choice. Marcus drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet shattering the chain that bound Margaret Sullivan's ankle to the platform. The metallic snap echoed across the square as the crowd dove for cover. "Everyone down!" Morrison shouted, his own gun appearing as if by magic. "This is official business." Chaos erupted. Garrett's men went for their weapons, but Morrison and Marcus had position and experience. Marcus's second shot took a fake deputy in the shoulder, spinning him around. Morrison's gun boomed, and another of Garrett's men clutched his arm and stumbled backward. Margaret Sullivan, freed from her chain, immediately began working at the locks binding the other women. "Everyone stay calm," she called out. "We're not going anywhere." Pablo clung to his mother as Elena Restrepo strained against her bonds. "Por favor, señora, ayúdanos." "Working on it," Margaret muttered, her fingers flying over the primitive locks. Marcus noticed she handled the metalwork with surprising skill, not typical for most frontier women. Garrett had taken cover behind a water trough, his remaining men scattered around the square. "You're all under arrest," he shouted. "Interfering with territorial business, assault on government officials." "Funny thing about that," Morrison called back, reloading behind an overturned cart. "Judge Whitman sent me a wire this morning. Says there's no Samuel Garrett on the territorial assessment rolls. Says the real assessor's been missing for 3 weeks." The crowd, now pressed against storefronts and wagons for cover, began to murmur with new understanding. Marcus saw recognition dawning on several faces, the kind of ugly comprehension that came when decent people realized they'd nearly been party to something evil. "That's impossible," Garrett snarled, but his voice carried less conviction now. Margaret had freed 2 more women and was working on Elena's chains. "Almost there," she whispered. "These locks are simple spring mechanisms. Whoever made them wasn't expecting educated fingers." Marcus kept his gun trained on Garrett's position while covering Morrison's advance. "Where'd you learn lock work, ma'am?" Margaret's mouth quirked in a small smile. "My late husband wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was a locksmith before we came west. Taught me the trade in case something happened to him." Her voice caught slightly. Guess he was wiser than he knew. The chain snapped free, and Elena Restrepo stumbled into her son's arms. "Gracias, Dios mío, gracias." Morrison had worked his way closer to Garrett's position. "Sam, or whoever you are, you're surrounded. Your men are down, your story's full of holes, and that judge is waiting. Make this easy on yourself." "Easy?" Garrett laughed bitterly. "You think any of this was easy? You know how much planning went into setting up those debt papers? How much work it took to identify recent widows with property worth taking?" The admission hung in the air like a confession. Margaret freed another woman, the silver-haired matron, who immediately began helping with the remaining chains. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at hearing Garrett's scheme laid bare for the crowd to witness. "So, you admit it was fraud," Morrison said. "Makes my job simpler." "Admit it?" Garrett stood up from behind the trough, his gun aimed at little Pablo. "I'm proud of it. Smartest operation this territory's seen. Identify recently widowed women with property, forge debt papers in their dead husbands' names, auction them off to recover the debts. Clean, legal, profitable." Elena Restrepo stepped protectively in front of her son, but Garrett's gun followed the movement. The beautiful part was using their own grief against them. Confused, frightened women don't question official-looking paperwork, especially when it comes with badges and territorial seals. Marcus felt his finger tighten on the trigger, but Pablo was too close to risk a shot. "Except you got sloppy with the ink." Garrett shrugged. "Minor detail. Who's gonna check? Most people out here can't read anyway." Margaret had freed all but the last woman now, her hands working steadily despite the gun pointed at the child. "You're forgetting something," she said quietly. "What's that?" "You assumed we were helpless." Margaret's tone carried a dangerous edge. "You assumed wrong." The last chain snapped, and chaos erupted again. The silver-haired matron, who'd been quietly positioning herself during Margaret's work, lunged forward with surprising agility, tackling Garrett around the legs. His shot went wild, the bullet splintering wood above the crowd. Morrison and Marcus moved simultaneously. Morrison's gun butt cracked against Garrett's skull while Marcus secured the fallen weapon. The remaining fake deputies, seeing their leader down and their scheme exposed, threw down their arms. Dust settled slowly over the square. The 7 women stood free, chains pooled at their feet like defeated serpents. Pablo clung to his mother, while Elena whispered grateful prayers in Spanish. Margaret Sullivan stood with her head high, green eyes bright with vindicated dignity. Morrison began collecting weapons and prisoners, while Marcus holstered his Colt. The crowd emerged from cover, their faces showing mixtures of relief, embarrassment, and anger at having been nearly fooled. "Ladies," Marcus said, touching his hat brim, "I believe you're free to go home." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Whelan, we owe you a considerable debt." "No debt," Marcus replied. "Just glad we got to the truth in time." "Nevertheless," she continued, "we've been discussing something while you gentlemen were sorting out the shooting. We have a proposition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am?" Elena Restrepo spoke up, her accented English careful but clear. "Senor Marcus, you saved us. But there are others, no? Other women, other children who need help?" The silver-haired matron nodded emphatically. "I'm Dorothy Claiborne. Taught school back east before coming out here with my late husband. These frontier towns need proper education, proper care for children who've lost parents." Margaret smiled. "What we're proposing, Mr. Whelan, is a partnership. You offered $50 for our freedom. We'd like to offer something in return. Our skills, our knowledge, our gratitude translated into action." Marcus looked around at the 7 women, each representing different backgrounds and abilities. A teacher, a locksmith's widow, a blacksmith's wife, and 4 others whose stories he hadn't yet heard. An idea began forming in his mind, something Sarah would have loved. What kind of partnership? "An orphanage," Margaret said simply. "The territory's first proper orphanage. Children like Pablo here need homes, education, care. Widowed women need purpose and community. You have land, we have skills. Together, we could build something worthwhile. Morrison looked up from securing prisoners. Territory's been talking about needing proper child services. A lot of youngsters lose parents out here. Disease, accidents, Indian raids. Most end up fending for themselves, or worse. Marcus thought of his empty ranch house. The rooms Sarah had hoped to fill with children of their own. The idea felt right. Felt like something she would have embraced wholeheartedly. What would you need? Dorothy Claiborne stepped forward. Proper buildings first. Schoolrooms, dormitories, kitchen facilities. Then supplies, books, bedding, medical equipment. Most importantly, legal recognition from the territorial government. I can help with the legal side, Morrison offered. Judge Whitman's been pushing for better child welfare programs. This might be exactly what he's looking for. Marcus made his decision. Ladies, I think Sarah would have liked this idea very much. My ranch has plenty of room for expansion, good water rights, and proximity to both Tombstone and Benson for supplies. He paused, feeling the weight of commitment settling on his shoulders. Count me in. Elena Restrepo's eyes filled with tears. Es un milagro. Pablo, did you hear? Senor Marcus will help us build a home for children who have no families. The boy looked up at Marcus with wide, serious eyes. Will there be room for horses? Children should learn about horses. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had since Sarah's death 6 months ago. Son, there'll definitely be room for horses. As the afternoon sun began to slant lower across Tombstone's dusty streets, the group began making practical plans. Dorothy would handle educational curriculum and teacher recruitment. Margaret would manage administrative details and legal documentation. Elena would oversee cooking and household management. The other women, whose stories gradually emerged, brought skills ranging from nursing to seamstress work to basic carpentry. Deputy Morrison finished loading Garrett and his accomplices into a wagon for transport to the territorial jail. Marcus, I'll need statements from everyone about this fraud scheme. Judge will want complete documentation for the trial. We'll provide whatever testimony you need, Margaret assured him. After what we've been through, we want to see justice done properly. As the prisoners were driven away, Marcus noticed the crowd beginning to disperse. Several townspeople approached to offer congratulations and support for the orphanage plan. Word was already spreading about the day's events and the proposed children's home. Mr. Whelan, called a voice from the thinning crowd. Marcus turned to see Dr. Samuel Holliday approaching. Not the famous gunfighter, but Tombstone's dedicated physician who shared the notorious name. Heard about your orphanage plan. Territory's desperate for proper medical care for children. I'd be honored to serve as consulting physician. Margaret smiled gratefully. That's very generous, Doctor. We'll certainly need medical expertise. As the sun touched the western mountains, casting long shadows across the square, Marcus felt a sense of completion settling over him. The day had begun with injustice and fraud, but was ending with hope and purpose. Elena Restrepo approached, carrying Pablo, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Senor Marcus, how can we ever thank you? By helping build something good, Marcus replied. Something that'll last beyond any of us. Dorothy Claiborne overheard and nodded approvingly. That's what education's truly about. Building foundations for the future. These children will grow up to build this territory into something better than what we found. Margaret had been quietly organizing the other women, making lists and assignments. She approached Marcus as the group prepared to separate for the evening. "We'll need to start immediately with basic planning. Would tomorrow be too soon to visit your property and begin assessments?" "Tomorrow's perfect," Marcus agreed. "I'll have coffee ready at dawn." As the women prepared to return to their homes they now owned free and clear thanks to the day's revelations, Margaret lingered a moment longer. "Mr. Whelan, may I ask what made you offer that $50? Most men would have simply watched the auction proceed." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, remembering Sarah's voice during countless discussions about right and wrong, about standing up when standing up mattered. "My wife used to say that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you think nobody will ever know." Margaret's green eyes softened. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was, and she would have loved what we're planning to build. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as the group finally began to disperse. Elena and Pablo would spend the night with Dorothy Claiborne, who had offered temporary shelter. The other women had family or friends to return to, their freedom now legally secure thanks to Deputy Morrison's intervention and the exposure of Garrett's fraud. Marcus walked slowly back toward where he'd left his horse, his mind already planning the construction projects ahead. The ranch would need significant expansion. Dormitories, classrooms, a proper kitchen capable of feeding dozens of children. The work would be extensive and expensive, requiring most of his savings and probably a loan from the Tombstone bank. But as he mounted his horse and began the ride back to his property, Marcus felt lighter than he had since Sarah's death. Purpose had returned to his life, meaning beyond simple survival. The empty rooms of his house would echo with children's laughter instead of his solitary footsteps. The moon was rising as he reached his ranch, its silver light illuminating the fields and buildings that would soon become Arizona Territory's first official orphanage. Marcus unsaddled his horse and stood for a moment in the quiet evening, imagining the changes to come. In his mind, he could almost hear Sarah's voice carried on the desert wind, approving of the choice he'd made. $50 had bought 7 women's freedom, but it had purchased something far more valuable: the chance to build hope from injustice, family from loss, and future from the broken pieces of the past. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of planning and construction, of legal documentation and fundraising. But tonight, Marcus Whelan slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that his actions had honored both his wife's memory and his own conscience. The territory's first orphanage would rise from this desert ground, a testament to the truth that sometimes the right choice and $50 can change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.